Thank you, Sandy, for doing this, meeting us here in the Stellar Room, and also being part of the paper.
Glad to help.
We've been working together for exactly 10 years, so it's actually very hard to know. There's so much implicit stuff between us that it's very hard to know where to start. I normally say that you are one of the very few people, and the only one I've worked with, that has been brave enough to change careers 3 times and still be successful. You've done switches that are pretty abrupt, but still have kept your science, your entrepreneurship going.
So the internal view is I've always been really interested in people, in psychology and sociology, but I was also really disappointed because it wasn't, in my view, very scientific in the sense that you could predict things. Mm-hmm. You know, you learned about this trend or that effect, but it wasn't like you could, like with mechanics, you could build a bridge. You couldn't say with humans and human science what's good and what's bad. And my first job was actually, well, just to earn a living, but it was using satellite data to count beavers in Canada.
It's a great story. I've heard it a couple, but maybe you can tell it again.
Well, so it was a place that was a research lab, a national research lab, and we had just put the first satellite to watch the Earth and see how much food there was and look at things like we discovered climate change and so forth. But one of the very first things was, well, how are the beavers doing? But the resolution is like an acre. You can't possibly see a beaver, but you can see the lakes. And so if you count the lakes that beavers create, you know something about the number of beavers. And that actually is a metaphor for my whole career, which is, what are the breadcrumbs, the traces that tell us about the biological beings, about the ecology? And from that job, I went back to graduate school because I learned that engineers didn't know how to understand biology. You needed to know something about psychology and biology and things. And I came to MIT because, well, they'd have me, and because they combined AI, which was the machine, and biology together to try and understand people. And so that launched me onto a career of perception, understanding human perception by looking at the behavior of people. And that looked like machine vision, but also over time we did things like sign language reading, real-time sign language reading. We did things where we were looking at mothers talking baby talk to their kids and how the kids needed both the sight and the sound to be able to learn. So it's perception broader. And then we realized that all of this was sort of third person perspective. So I'm watching you, but what do you see? To put the camera and the microphone on the person, suddenly you get a very different view of the world because it's under your control.
And that brings you from the more machine vision to the wearable, right?
To the wearables.
How do I change the point of view so that I have more of
a human view of things? And so yes, I started the wearables group. We got 20 students to build and wear computers, and you know, we put cameras on their heads and microphones and things like that. And what we discovered is that some of these very difficult problems, like sign language reading, become very easy when you have the first person perspective. And what we discovered also as people began to wear these is that there was a lot of non-linguistic communication between people. People actually go through a sort of a dance with each other when they're talking, and that dance gets more complicated in groups. And I began to be very interested in the dance of communication, which gets you to all this data about people interacting and trying to, again, understand the biology of it. What is this for? What's going on? And then over the last many years, it's been sort of scaling it up, where now we have data from a good fraction of all the people in an entire country. And we ask, well, how does growth happen? How does inequality happen? How does poverty happen? How does wealth creation happen? What is the preconditions for crime? And trying to really understand these things in a predictive, data-driven way. So it actually is a lot more coherent than it looks. It's all about understanding the human condition using the sort of breadcrumbs that we leave behind all of the time.
Hearing that, it sounds really coherent and simple, but I know that along the way you fought against, I wasn't there at the beginning because I was a baby, but later on I could see from the distance that at least step 2 and step 3 are kind of really fighting against the grain, right? Because one thing that I observe about technology, and I feel really humble talking in front of you about this things because you have a much deeper vision. But one thing that we've written together about this is that what technology wants, or maybe technologies want, is a lot of homogenization of things, in the sense that, well, if we all have a computer, then we should really kind of stop using all these gestures, and we should really stop doing all these weird things and these coffee breaks and these water cooler conversations, because we just have a newer, more streamlined way of talking to each other. So I think every technologist and computer scientist back in the 90s or the 80s would think, well, let's just optimize that and make it so that we make even less of this. And then you really did something that is really difficult, which is, well, first, no, I don't want to get rid of those things. I don't want to get rid of, even if I like computers and you're a hacker and you like breaking things down, but I still like doing it with my friends and then doing it with my students now. And I like, while I'm doing this, talking to them. And there is a lot of value in this that I cannot put inside the machine. And if I really look at this side and stop optimizing that side, I'm going to first understand a lot of things that are scientific about how we work together, how we trust each other, how we cooperate, that are really not going to go away just because we have better machines. And I always thought this an underrated view of your work, that you really were fighting against this universalizing, homogenizing.
So fighting against a couple of things. One is that academics is siloed. There's computer vision, and there's wearable computing, which we helped create, and then there's the sort of computational social science, which we helped create. All of those disruptive of the fabric of academia. But that's how you make progress, first of all. The key thing, though, here is, as you remember I said at the beginning, I was interested in people and human society. So everything I do is human-centered. It's human-centered design. It's not about the technology. It's about augmenting people. It's about understanding what it is that's the genius, as it were, that's inside people. And so I've never tried to replace people. I don't like the idea of artificial intelligence, the robots that are human-like. That's not a particularly interesting thing. I like the idea of people having superpowers and being able to work together like some sort of jazz ensemble that just does the right thing. That's the thing that animates me. It's a very different perspective. And it comes out in little ways everywhere. It's like when I first started doing real machine vision, everybody in the field was doing, let's recognize parts in a factory. And I said, well, no, actually, let's turn the camera around and look at people. Recognize faces and gestures, and that was, at that time, surprisingly revolutionary.
And because of that, let me ask you, you were very interested in people. Were you always a people person? When you were a kid, were you introverted? Were you extroverted? In the sense that sometimes what I've noticed is that people who like studying people, such as myself, we have a kind of a weird combination of traits. So just to open it, I look like an extrovert, but I'm actually a complete introvert.
Right.
And the extroversion normally for me is kind of a mask. Like, well, if I go to the party and say something really funny, you would let me in so I can see what you're up to, but also you would let me alone. I've already proved you that I'm cool, and now I just want to look at people. How about you?
Yeah, that is a tension, right? I think that introversion, extroversion is a little bit too simple.
Too simple.
I mean, so a good test is if you go to a party, do you stand in the corner and watch people?
Total in the corner.
Right, yeah. So I do that, but I also like talking to people, but only certain like I don't like small talk particularly.
Mm-hmm.
I like to learn things. I'm just sort of curious about lots of things. So if you want to talk to me about that, I'm your guy. We'll talk about all sorts of crazy things. So I'm not the archetypical people person. I'm not the networker who goes around and does things. But I'm very curious, which means I talk to a lot of people and know a lot of people because I'm interested in all of those things. Mm-hmm. So it's sort of an orthogonal dimension to extrovert, introvert. It's just sort of unbridled curiosity.
Yeah, and it might be one thing that we don't really acknowledge that much, right? We see people in these two sides of the spectrum. What I observe is real extroverts. They like being around people so much that what would be the point of studying them? Right? If you love networking a lot and you're very good at it, that can make you very successful.
Well, it's like if you love the water, you dive in, and then when you're in the water, it's just the way the world is. Exactly. You don't notice it anymore. Whereas if you're on the edge, you pay attention to what's going on in it. Yeah.
Exactly. So we've talked about machine vision, and then one other thing that I wanna bring up is something that you normally give as advice to younger scientists, and you gave once to me and Iyad, which is that there are many types of scientists and you can be successful in many ways. And one of them is you build a castle, and then you spend a lot of money doing that, and then you are the king of the castle, whether it's artificial intelligence or psychology or economics. And then what you do is you're going to fortify the castle. You're going to make the field very much look like something you're good at. So you're going to build some, sometimes useful, sometimes a bit artificial barriers of entry. And then that's your legacy, right? And you said that another way is that you build a castle, people can come in, they're warm, they're fed, they have something to do, but then you just leave the castle, they can enjoy it,
right?
And you can go to the next one and start again, and you said that that's what you prefer to do, and it's an interesting analogy.
I think that the standard thing in academics is you pick an area and you just dominate it, right? And I get bored really quickly. So I've just explained that there's sort of a deeper connection about what I do, but it's been about additional understanding of other dimensions of humans, starting from, face recognition, gesture recognition, up through what is the nature of modern human society. It's the same problem. It's just lots of different scales. It's difficult as an academic because you're not reinforced for that, right? But I've also been lucky because I have been able to do the emperor's new clothes trick several times, which is like when I arrived in computer vision, it was all about these complicated expert systems. And I said, well, no, actually, maybe it's really simple. And I was right. It sort of transformed. People were not happy with me, but
they were not happy with it at the beginning?
Oh, lots of them were not so happy because they were building castles about this really complicated stuff. And I said...
Thing over thing over thing.
Yeah,
stacks
and I said,
of...
no, actually, it's pretty simple, right? And
brilliant.
You have to get the simple just right. There's an art to simple, right? But it's not this sort of complicated structure. And the same seems to be true about interpersonal. Because there's a lot of signaling behavior, which is not so complicated. It's not like these complicated linguistic structures with all this, levels of meaning. No, a lot of it actually is a lot simpler than it looks because we're biological beings and we inherited all of that stuff. It still has its complexities, but it's a very different sort of thing than the linguistic stuff. And the same thing is true about society in general, is that a lot of it is just about ideas and flow of ideas, access to opportunity, and not about all the, politics and debating and strategies and stuff. turns out that, the vast majority of it is actually fairly simple. At least that's what the data suggest. And of course, that makes you unpopular. On the other hand, if you get your point across, it means you've made a mark. And I'm proud of the fact that, it's now been almost 20 years since I've done computer vision, but still some of my papers are the most cited in the whole field.
Maybe the most cited, literally, yeah.
Well, not the most cited anymore, but close enough. And it's that sort of seeing that the way people are doing it is going in the wrong direction. It's something that a smart novice can do, where you come to it and you say, well, wait a second, that's not right. And then figuring out how to enunciate that and make the point to the community, as opposed to diving in and accepting everything and trying to help build that structure. It's one of the main things that I spend time with my students about, is to say, you're going to read all of this stuff in the field. Don't believe 80% of it. It's probably not right. And I know it's like the golden received word, but that doesn't mean it's right. 20 years from now, you're going to look back and you're going to say, oh my God, all that stuff was irrelevant. It was this other thing. Well, so your job is to find the other thing.
It's really useful. And again, coming back to the contrast with other very successful scientists of your generation, your field, there's this thing that I said, if I had to write a biography professional biography of your work, I would title it The Scientist of Intimacy. And intimacy understood in really this bottomless gap in between the technology and people, right? Is that I think computer science general assumption when doing work is that it doesn't exist. But at some point, once a machine is able to do a task for you or with you, what you have to look at is at the machine. Again, make it better, make it smaller, make it faster. And you seem to, over and over, look at this intimate space between the person and the machine and say, that's the magic. There's the magic in two senses, right? One of them is you're only going to understand what's great about people if you look at them using technology to solve very hard problems. Because we can argue that for things that you don't need technology, they might not be that hard. Right? When you really need the fastest technologies, but still, even when you look at them at this peak performance, the biggest thing that you're going to do is not to solve the problem that you're trying to solve, but to learn how they are coordinating to solve it.
Well, so the way I think about these things is that the technology and the human have to work together. So you want to think of them as a system. If you're thinking about the technology or the people, you've made a bad mistake. They have to work together. And most recently, I've been calling this HumanAI. So the idea is how do you get humans and machines to be intelligent?
I like that.
And work together, not as separate devices, but as a unity. And so if you cast it that way, then the big questions are about what do you mean by intelligence and how do you achieve intelligence? And then how do these systems of people and machines work together with the real world to act more and more intelligent, to learn, to become better? And the key thing with the artificial intelligence we have is called the credit assignment problem, which is a sort of slightly horrible name, but it's how do you take lots of little dumb things and put them together in such a way that it acts intelligently. And the way it's currently done is you take a bunch of things and you put them together randomly, and they don't have to be very smart things at all. But what you do is you give them lots and lots and lots of examples, and when something works, you reinforce the ones that were helping to make it work. When something doesn't work, you sort of cut those connections or downgrade them. And that's a little bit like a human organization where you have all this org chart stuff. And when the organization works, you could reinforce things, and when it doesn't work, you could sort of damp it down. And there are examples like this that have been pretty successful. So in sports, Moneyball, where you keep track of who was on the field when the goal was scored, and you make sure that they pair up in the future, or Kaizen in Japan, where it's continuous improvement, just trying to reinforce the things that work and change the things that don't. And that's a little bit like evolution, of course, too. The ones that work reproduce, and the ones that don't. And so it's trying to sort of ask, how do we make the mixture of humans and machines work better and better? And one of the key things is this sort of selection. You get rid of the ones that don't, and you have lots of innovation around the ones that do to try and find better and better things. And actually, that's the secret of things like Amazon or Google. That's that sort of continuous trial and error, improving the things that seem to work and pushing them further. And I think that's an entirely reasonable way to build technology, because you're getting input from people about this too. They're not seen as separate. The human values, the human experience is an integral part of this. You're talking about designing tools. You're talking about designing society. And of course, the human nature is part of it. And so when people talk about ethics, for instance, they often separate the machine and the human. And I think that's a mistake. You can talk about this stuff, but really what we want to do is sort of experience it, see what it feels like, take the ones that are good,
really
push them a little further. You don't know until you actually try it. So we need a much more experimental society, a much more experimental technology that are mixed together. So when people talk about these things, one of the things I like to do is remind them about mobile telephones. So mobile telephones are the fastest dispersing technology in human history. Faster than fire, faster than writing, faster than anything. And you may not think they're the best thing, but in general, humans will like hold on to them more than anything else. You have your phone, not your keys.
It's a baby.
Okay, it's like a baby, right?
Yeah.
And those phones contain at least 5 types of AI that were considered to be science fiction only 10 to 20 years ago. So if you go back and you look at, say, Star Trek, the TV series, there's all these things that were thought to be centuries in the future, well, except that you have them in your pocket now, and you love it,
Yes.
right? And what the things all have in common is that they're tools for people. They're not replacing people. And they're tools for making people work together better. So for messaging asynchronously, so I don't have to interrupt you, for finding where you are in the park when we're going to meet up, for translating language so that I can understand you. All of these things are augmenting people and the communication between people, most importantly, and that's why we love them, because they're now helping us be more people.
That's beautiful. But then the one thing that really I give you credit when I talk to folks inside of academia is the first person that had the two words in the one sentence, the first person to do that, to have the word privacy and to have the word big data in one sentence was you. That you say, well, be careful, because
Right.
you can do a lot of great things with this, but some folks are not going to be happy with that. How did you see this coming?
Well,
if you can remember.
No, I can remember. There's probably a couple sort of little things, but the really big thing was when I had all these students wearing wearable computers, and we were collecting data constantly. And it became very clear that, I could know who you were hanging out with and when, and all sorts of stuff that you really wouldn't necessarily want to share. And the thing that actually drove me was I could see that there were a lot of great goods that come from this, right? If we could really understand humans, if we could keep track of things like depression and medical things from this continuous stream of data, that would be a huge good for the human race. And indeed, actually, we're getting there for those things. But at the same time, it made 1984 and Big Brother look like, he wasn't very imaginative, because knowing what you do every millisecond in every dimension is really a whole different level of invasiveness. And so I began thinking about what is the philosophy that should underlie this. And the key thing is that this data is valuable. It's going to become an asset. It's going to become an asset to a lot of people. The things that are different, of course, is that data, when you write it down or put it on a computer, can spread very quickly. It's not constrained the way physical things are. And that a lot of this data is co-created. So yeah, your cell phone company can know where you are, but in return, it's paying you for service, right? I mean, it gives you the ability to make the call. That's why you use it. So they have some rights too. Otherwise, why should they do this? And in thinking about this and talking to a number of people, legal people, ethics people, folks like that, came up with this idea of the New Deal on data. And it was the idea that we needed to really do something fundamentally different about data, because this was like money, like freedom, like owning land. It was a fundamental new type of good that people could control and use. And it was likely to be as important as land or gold or things like that, which it's turned out to be, if not more so. But yet it was different in ways too. And the formulation that sort of began to stick was this notion that you have rights to say things about what happens to your data. You have informed consent. You have to know what's happening to how the data is being used. You have to agree to it. You have the right to pull that back. But they have the rights to use parts of the data too, and particularly aggregates of it that don't relate back to any individual person. And so I wrote a paper in 2007 that started a discussion in the World Economic Forum in Davos, where we had the Justice Commissioner of the EU, the head of the US Federal Trade Commission, CTO, Microsoft, et cetera, about what we were going to do about all this data that was coming. And the thing that sort of spiced the conversation was this paper. I don't know how many of them actually read it, but that was the nature of the discussion. And out of that grew things like GDPR, the European privacy regulation. And
how did they react when you, because these people arguably didn't even know about big data in '07, right? Like,
yeah.
It would be like, oh, wait, I'm trying to catch up as a CEO of big telco in whatever.
Well, more importantly, as a regulator, you're dealing with, credit card numbers, and suddenly and by the way, we're going to know every time you do a movement in your whole life, right?
Right. Imagine you go see Sandy Pentland because he's going to tell you something really fancy about what to do with the data, and then he tells you, well, I'm going to tell you a bit of that, but I'm also going to just
scare the pants off you.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, so that's part of the discussion, right? I have to say that the people that were there are incredibly smart, determined people, including and perhaps especially the regulators. They're not technical people. Typically, they're lawyers. But they understood that there was both a real benefit and a real danger. And to their credit, they took it seriously, and they fought a battle which lasted for many years. And of course, we were in there helping them, but they were the ones that led that battle to be able to make some serious steps at protecting individual privacy. And this is still an ongoing battle. But the fact that Europe has put GDPR in place means that the US is responding to it, China is responding to it. People are beginning to take it all very seriously. And one of the other things that drives it is cybersecurity. So you may not be so concerned about privacy, but privacy is just one type of security. If they can steal your data, they can steal everybody's data.
Absolutely.
And you ought to be really worried about that, and that has been brought home again and again and again. And so we're beginning to make progress on that, and now the question arises, well, okay, so if people have rights, it's not ownership per se, it's ownership rights. There's an important legal distinction there. So it's the right to say what happens to your data, but not that you are the sole owner of it, that people get confused about that. But now we have this ecology where certain corporations, certain companies, certain nations become incredible lords of data. They have so much data, so much power in that new sense that is very, very scary. It's like the robber barons back in the late 1800s. What are we going to do about it? And we've experimented with different sort of formulations. The one that we're doing now, I'll pump for a little bit because I think it's really interesting.
Please.
The way we dealt with the robber barons and the big corporations is we formed unions. The way we dealt with the big banks is we formed credit unions, cooperative banks. The way we need to deal with the data is to form data cooperatives, data unions. And interestingly, co-ops around the world are chartered to manage your identity, your data. They wrote it into the founding documents 100 years ago. Wow. God knows exactly why. I think it was for notarized statements and things like that. But that's not what it says. It says that they're chartered to manage your identity and all the information pertaining to that. In the United States, 100 million people are members of these credit unions. That means 100 million people own organizations, community organizations, which are chartered to manage their data. And so what we've been busy doing is building the software that lets that happen automatically, where you download a little bit of software on your computer and your phone, and all of a sudden you have a bank account with all of your data. You don't need to do anything else. But now you have a community organization that you own, along with the people in your community, that can go to the hospital and say, no, 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 no. We want to know what treatments work and which ones don't. And in fact, we have the sort of data that you need, so you have to negotiate with us. It's a data union. You get to go with 100 million strong to Facebook and say, you know what? Half of all the adults in the country, your customers, want a different deal. And they control the data, and guess what? If you don't like that, we'll go to somebody else. And really, it can be just sort of the push of a button that enables a real competitor to Facebook with just as much data, or a dozen. So I think that the solution of organizing people together is a way to begin addressing this data homogeny where certain people control so much data.
Fascinating. I haven't heard of these data co-ops, but it's very interesting that you somehow think that the solution to this arguably very hard problem, right? That you have two enemies here, if you want to cartoonize it. You have the big companies, can be very evil, in a way, financially evil, right? In the sense that they are maximization machines and they have to maximize profit to the shareholders. And what they're going to do is, along this process, do something that is bad for you.
Right.
And governments, which are power machines, what they have to do is to maximize power so that they can control, which is one of the, not the only thing that you ask for a government, certainly one of the big ones. And the idea that the solution to this is not to create another foe that would fight them, but to actually say, no, listen, we already have a network that is kind of invisible, but is vast, which are co-ops. And it's a cooperative network that we're already cooperating on this, and it's working so well that we forgot.
That's right. Yeah, it solved the big bank problem in a certain way by providing competition. It solved a lot of the sort of big corporation problem by providing labor unions. And the fact that these are weak now is because they were so successful. So now what we need data co-ops to be able to create a sustainable data environment. So by having large entities that represent the people en masse.
And then, of course, there's the next chapter probably in this dance of privacy and data, which when we're talking about what you could do with private data, you said that the first thing, if I know something about you through your data, is I can help you. And the next level thing would be I can help your community, I can help your city, I can help your country.
Well, so one of the things that most people don't talk about, but I think is actually the most hopeful thing, is what you just said about understanding the community, understanding the country. So if you really think about it, we have very little idea what policies work in government and which ones don't. There's all this fighting about it because there's really no data about it. It's all, well, my uncle said this and my aunt said that, and you know, if you're Republican or Democrat or whatever, you believe very different things. There really isn't the sort of scientific data about this that we need to figure out. How do you make a good country? How do you make something that addresses poverty? There are examples that look good, but they're rarely analyzed enough. Recent examples in the United States are things like the broken windows policy for policemen, right? Well, people claimed it worked well, but when they finally went back and looked at it, which took 10 years, they realized that that was just an outlier, and really it had all sorts of negative effects that they hadn't accounted for. Why did that take 10 years? That should have happened almost immediately. The experimentation is good, but the evaluation has to come with it. There are many examples like that in our society where, you know, we actually don't know. If you're collecting data about how people are living, you can begin doing that. I said, oh, collecting data, this is going to be scary, right? 1984, But we do already collect data in ways that people don't find scary at all. It's called the census. Every 10 years, we say, well, there's this many people here, this many women, the women, kids earning this much money, they get sick this way, etc. And we use that data to make government work. Well, sometimes we don't do a great job of it, but without that data, we couldn't make it work at all. And so what I'm proposing is that we make the census a lot richer than it is today.
Wow.
And we have some examples by this. For instance, Raj Chetty and his colleagues have gotten the IRS to release some data about intergenerational mobility. And the results are, I think, shocking. It gives you a recipe for actually solving a lot of the poverty problems in this country. I don't know that they're 100% correct, but there are these experiments where things worked. Now the question is why did he have to go to all sorts of extraordinary means to get a hold of that data?
I'm sure it wasn't easy. Yeah.
Well, people in the IRS got fired.
Wow.
It was sort of bending the rules, apparently.
Wow.
But the point is that data is owned by the citizens. Why wasn't this being evaluated continuously to find out how well the government is doing? How well are these policies working? Is it fair? And I think that we need a lot more of that in this world. And we have the examples of census-based data, census policies that aren't so scary. And I think we can do a lot more of it without endangering individual privacy, without worrying about some sort of a massive machine of the state, and so forth.
So that's not going to be an easy task, but if you guys pull that off, that would, because they already spend millions of dollars in the census, right?
Well, what's interesting, okay, is that if you look at the UN's Sustainable Development Goals, my co-conspirators and I were able to put in data.
Oh, you were? Wow.
As a thing that's supposed to happen. There's 169 measures that are supposed to happen of things like inequality and poverty and genocide and sustainability that every country on earth has signed off on measuring constantly. Now, they're not really doing it yet. They don't quite know how to do it. But already you're seeing banks and financial institutions asking about that data. So it may happen. And what that will do is bring a level of transparency and accountability to government that is hard to imagine today. And in preparation for that, we're actually building examples of this for several countries. We're building one for Colombia, one for Senegal, one for Israel, that are, it's not us building it, we're helping them design it and build it, but it's this idea of the rich census from which you can tell how society is working in a much more granular and real-time way than you can today.
So this really is very compatible with your optimism about AI and big data and technology and people. One of the things that you said before I move on to what you're working on now and what you see going forward, is that you've been a bit critical with, as you said, separating the ethics of machines from the ethics of people, and in a way being too constrictive or restrictive, if that's not a word, on what we try to do with machines. And I've seen you a few times appreciating what people have tried to look into. Listen, this machine might be doing something that is not great, but you need to shut down the whole thing because until we figure that out. And you've been really favoring more this learning by doing. The question that I have for you is, do you think we are entering a bit of a too self-aware phase in AI and machine learning and technology that is going to put more difficulties on that style of work that you've been known for, which is trying things out?
Experimental.
You haven't really run into any scandal ever, so you must have done something right. You have been careful enough, right? Versus other scandals that have happened in the last 3 years. Do you think that we are in a too self-aware phase, and why?
Well, the first attitude is that we're not that smart to sort of figure out what's going to work and what's not going to work without trying it. We need to be a little bit humble and try these things and see how they feel. So it's fine to have ethical discussions about ethics, but that's not the end of it. You actually have to try and use those to try it out on real people and see how it feels. If you had described a lot of things about cell phones, for instance, you might come up with all sorts of horrible scenarios, but in fact, some of these same facilities are things that are used worldwide and loved by people and have resulted in dramatic drops in various sorts of inequalities, disease, and things like that. So it's good to be a little humble about this and try things, but with that comes the responsibility of measuring it and figuring out what's really going on when you try this thing. You have to actually instrument it well enough to be able to see the unintended side effects as well as the main effect that you intended. What I think is happening now is that worldwide, people are becoming much more aware of the rest of the world. You know, it's only been 40 years or something like that, that we lived in a world where you weren't really aware of what was happening in the next town over. Maybe you had national TV. That was a novelty that's only less than a century old, where you weren't aware of anything except distant echoes of war. It's been less than 40 years. You wouldn't know about if there was a horrible accident in the next town. Today, you know about everything that's happening around you, and particularly the things that get your adrenaline going. So we're being bombarded by all these adrenaline-provoking things that happen around us. Now, in fact, murder rates, death rates,
Going down.
all going down, not just a little, dramatically, but our awareness is going up exponentially. So it feels really bad, right? I think what people are doing, of course, is reacting to that, you know, with adrenaline, a little bit irrationally, maybe a lot irrationally. But if you also watch, what you're seeing is you're seeing that the world is moving from this sort of industrial model where the same law applies to everybody in the whole country to things where there's differences in law in different places. So, for instance, the number of countries in the world has gone up dramatically in the last 50, 60 years. People are breaking into smaller units. Cities are becoming more powerful. They're the units of action. That's experimentation. People are trying things in different ways. And as a consequence, you get sort of more this sort of community orientation and involvement, but you also get to discover things that can be copied elsewhere. And so, yeah, we're more aware of things, but that's being countervailed by the local action and the local governance trend. And what I hope will happen is that people will embrace that locality and begin to treat this as actually continuous experimentation. Every community has the obligation to try and be better for its members. And that means you don't have to be the same as the next guy over. You're going to try it. And if you got it right, they'll copy you. If you got it wrong, apologize, copy them. But that's the trick of AI. That's this human AI, where you're feeding back objective results, things that you measure, to make the connections better. That's the way forward. So, you look in the world and you say, objective results. What about all this false news and stuff? Right? Well, most of that is stories that people tell. Oh, there's this story and that story. But I still trust the census. Sometimes there's some things a little bit wrong on the edges. But, by and large, it's gold standard. It's got this way of handling things that's old
Fixing
and slow
errors.
and trustworthy. And we can build on that to be able to figure out, what is the real poverty rate? What is the real crime rate? Are the kids living or are they dying young? Those are things which are not that hard to measure, and those are the things that matter. And so if this city tries things one way and it begins to work and the kids don't die and the crimes don't happen, let's figure out what they did and try and copy it. That's it. It's actually sort of simple. Don't get distracted by all the screaming and yelling and running around. Try to, focus on what we can actually know and which things are working.
That's beautiful, and it brings me, before I ask you about HumanAI, I want to remind you a couple of anecdotes that we share about the screaming and connectivity. And it seems that one thing that I've noticed while you were saying that is that you can only scream about some things in a given time, and if you do it too early, people think that you are like making things up, and if you're optimistic during those screaming times, they think you are naive. And two bits of screaming that I want to just share, just to see what comes back. What I did an exercise of looking at all the papers that we've done together, and there are quite a bit, and some of them are well cited, some others are not. And not that it really matters, but just to show them. And one of the least cited that started to be cited very recently was a very strange paper that we did. We call it Stealing Reality, after your reality mining theme of research. And it was a paper that imagined a really wacky scenario. It imagined that a virus had gotten into a handset. So we're friends. And the virus has infected my Apple handset, but it has not infected your Samsung handset, let's say. So it cannot really pass on to you by Bluetooth or sharing a photo. But what it can do is it can observe you, right? So every time we are together, it can observe where we are and how much time we spend together, and how many things you have on and stuff. So it can do a bit of scanning on your device, and every time you call me, it can look if we both then go somewhere else and stuff. And what we said is, all right, if a little bit of the society got infected by this, and the virus could not progress anymore, it could just be in some computers, how much could you know about the whole society? And it was a whole lot.
There's a whole lot.
When we published that, people didn't believe it. They said, well, cell phone privacy is not really going to be a thing. So your models are really fancy and creative, but we're not ready for that. And fast forward, well, this is kind of what has happened with, if you look at a lot of concerns that we have today are about that. And it's hard to know when is the right time to look at these things. Is my philosophical question back to you, right? That it's hard to know how to pick topics of concern for technology or when to be optimistic. And do you have any rule for when to worry?
So, so to pick topics, you want to sort of look ahead and you have to say, when this spreads and it gets to be free and everybody has it, then what will be the concern? Right? So you're trying to look out, say, 10 years, which is a horrible business model, but it's great for research because you're going to get there before other people and you're going to sort of say, hey, watch out for this, it's coming. I mean, that's what we did with privacy early on, right? This is sort of second order privacy. By looking at the little breadcrumbs in other places, I can figure out what you're doing. The answer, though, for that particular type of thing, as for many of these things, is that the way we structure our IT systems, the way we structure all of the transactions we do is fundamentally flawed. It's something that was invented in the 50s and 60s, where you have these isolated things with moats around them, right? Firewalls, and then they like send little messages to each other. Okay? Well, Army folks invented that long before us, right? They invented that in the, in the dark ages. They'd build, big forts with moats and all that. And you might have noticed they stopped doing that because it only took one mistake, one door left open in the back or something like that, to lose the entire army. And they moved to a very different architecture, defense in depth. We need to do the same thing with all of our IT systems. And that's actually sort of the biggest financial research program I have here at MIT. It's called Trust Data. It's trying to talk people into doing things differently in a way that's fundamentally far more secure than today's systems. And it turns out it's not that difficult, but it's seeing things inside out. It's a different way of looking at the problem that it turns out works a lot better. Instead of having these moats where you put everything in that, you scatter things around and you have a way of monitoring all the things that are happening so that you can detect when bad stuff is going on. This probably isn't the right medium to explain it because it's a little bit computer science, but people are reacting positively to it, so I'm a little bit hopeful that we might be able to head off a lot of these horrible scenarios.
And I'm hearing a lot about Trust Data, and a few of my friends are coming next year to join that initiative. So
good. So
it looks really big. So I hope it works out.
Me too.
And to finish the conversation, I want to go to HumanAI. It's come up a couple of times. It's pretty new. Our paper is called Machine Behavior. HumanAI seems related enough.
Absolutely.
And I'm aware that you are starting to look at how to connect things like, now we have deep learning, and deep learning is all about the architecture of how you connect these units.
Right.
And I know that I'm reading your papers recently, I know that on the one hand, you're looking at what can we learn from human social networks to connect those deep learning units better?
Right.
And vice versa, you're also looking at how can you connect people among ourselves, or even people and machines.
People and machines, yeah.
Which is something that we've never done really, experimentally at the scale that you're doing it now. How are you thinking about this? I know that you're also starting to think about writing something longer about this. Tell me about this HumanAI, the theme. I'm fascinated about it.
So the phrase HumanAI is meant to convey that humans and machines can live together, and the existence proof are cell phones, where they have a tremendous effect, and we mostly love them. Have some little problems. We can probably fix those, but it's this thing that's sort of taken over and enhanced us in amazing ways. I've heard CEOs of major corporations say that it's really the cell phone, the ability to do things on the run, that has been the major source of productivity increases in the last decade.
Wow.
I was like, wow, that's pretty interesting. So in other words, all this AI stuff is really happening, and it's not taking away jobs. It's enhancing human communication and human cooperation. Okay, so what is about that? Well, we can learn from the AI sort of key insights that have to do about, this, when something works, look at the things that made it work and reinforce those. And when something doesn't work, look at the things that cause it to fall off and tone those down a little bit. So that's the sort of major learning there. You can look at humans, because humans are a network that's survived for millions of years in very hostile, changing environments. So what humans do is actually a far more difficult problem than what AIs do. AIs solve a particular problem where you have a lot of data, but they're not very good when things change, and they're not very good when you don't have a lot of data. Humans are able to deal with those remarkably well. So we'd like to understand the equivalent sort of trick for humans, and the trick seems to be learning from other people in a very particular way that has a mathematical name called Thompson sampling, but you don't need to know that. What it is find people that are like you, have the same sort of utility or values, and watch them to see what works. And what that gives you is a prior probability that it'll work for you too. In other words, and it sounds very, very simple, but it's surprising that it's not in machines.
We haven't really tested it.
And people don't use it consciously. No. Find people like you that share the same sort of loves and hates, see what works, and those are the things that are most likely for you to do.
It's like a mentor. Like an algorithm to find a mentor and be with the mentor, right?
That's right, yeah. And we sort of know this, right? It's like mentors. The way to pick a mentor is you pick somebody who's like you, shares a lot of the same goals, and is 10 years older. And
only 10?
Well, because other than that, the world changes.
I see.
Somebody who's 30 years older probably won't go through the same hurdles that you will, okay? So 10 years older. And you ask not what they say they do, what did they actually do, right? And you try to look at that as your set of choices that you could make. Copy them. It's not simple. But it's hard because we get distracted all the time.
And by doing that, are you learning things in how to connect AIs among themselves that you are transferring to people? Are you? Because I saw in the paper that you are seeing, for instance, increases in efficiency of deep learning neural networks that are connected, a bit like humans are connected.
That's right. Yeah.
I've seen this. You're translating this, which is really novel work, and it works, which is shocking.
Yeah, so by taking the lessons from human learning and applying them to this deep learning, AI stuff, you get order of magnitude increases in efficiency. That's pretty amazing, right? You get also the potential for a lot more generalization so that it doesn't have to be quite the same. But similarly, by taking the lessons from AI and applying them to human organizations, you can get organizations that learn a lot better. And so we're doing a lot of things in that space to be able to make human organizations a lot less static and a lot more learning and dynamic.
And you're doing human AI now, and if you had to extrapolate 10 years, what do you think this would look like, right? So human AI is probably the next frontier. If we don't want to be obsolete, we want to learn and not be replaced by a machine, by being very stubborn and not incorporating anything, or vice versa. If we want to get machines to be stuck, what do you think?
So what it feels like, right,
Just for fun.
It feels like, first of all, you're going to be more aware of the situation you're in than you are today. It's like when we go to work, when we are in an organization, we actually are very little aware of
Yes.
what's working, what's actually connected to real success. There's just a lot of busy stuff, right?
Yes.
Right? And a lot of that has to do with the siloing of organizations. They cut you off from information because they want you to do just one thing. So as that expands and begins to dissolve, the world becomes a little more complicated, and your role in it has to be a little more entrepreneurial. You have to begin to think about this stuff and sort of define your job, define your role continuously. And it's not like you get comfortable and you just do the same thing for 20
And
years.
get promoted.
Yeah, not like that. You have to sort of think about where can I be most effective? And by being coordinated, by having the right sort of information about what's going along in your environment, you can actually do that more effectively, and the group as a whole then becomes much more effective. It sounds like, oh, this is pie in the sky. But if you actually look at, like, for instance, a startup, people often talk about how magic it is. Well, what's magic is that when there's just 5 people in a garage,
You know everything.
you know everything.
Right.
You know what to do. You know what to do when. You don't have a fixed role. You don't say to somebody, oh, I can't do that, I'm just an accountant, right? You know, you pitch in and you help everything. And that sort of joint creativity is the sort of place that we're moving towards.
And then, of course, the difficulty then is going to be dealing with all the liquidity, right? So
That's right.
the fact that you need to figure out on day 1, day 10, month 3, what am I going to do for this big organization? How do I deal myself with a world that is so liquid, where I have so much responsibility, right? It's as a human, we
Yeah.
like comfort, we like. I think we like silence a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, that's
Sometimes.
exactly the sort of problem. People will say, oh my God, that sounds like real tension production. But actually, in many parts of our life, we enjoy that. When we
Yes.
think about, you know, networking with friends and coming up with good things to do and stuff like that,
Like
we
to be
hate
free.
boredom.
We like
We
to be
hate
free.
being in a rut, right? And so what this is saying is, let's take those sorts of skills that we use to entertain ourselves, to be social, and apply them to the rest of our life, as opposed to being robots in some parts of our life. It will be good to relax from time to time. Nobody says you can't do that. It's just you're not going to be moving ahead. You're going to see that you're relaxing, and other people will see that you're relaxing too. It's acceptable. You've
To
got
be
to have
aware
some
of
of that.
your relaxation or slacking.
Yeah, you got to know when the relaxation turns into slacking. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, Sandy, well, we could talk for hours, but probably we are
This is great. Thank
about
you.
our time. Thank you so
Good.
much.
Thank you.
To be continued.
Good. Yeah.